Hello, my sycophantic sludge of a subordinate.
I have to disagree with all three of those, though I like the alliteration.
I know! I had sycophantic sludge, then I hit subordinate, and I was like, oh my god, that works so right.
Yes. Still, it is a grave insult, and
Insults are best when they're grave or buried.
I prefer them buried, but I'm going to have to submit a report for workplace abuse. Hopefully getting you fired.
You can't call this work. You sit around in a chair.
Sitting is
talk.
very hard. Talking is very hard.
You have a completely different definition of difficult than the rest of the planet.
I am basically dying here.
Complain
My
to the
suffering
ants.
is uncapped. None has had more dramatic or terrible of a backstory than I at this moment.
To be capped.
Well, that was just rude.
I know. You can complain to the ants, because that's what lift 10 times their weight. And so until you start doing that, I want to
I have to lift you on this show, which is like 20 times my weight. Anyways, today...
If you brought some weight to the show, that wouldn't be an issue.
I am weightless. Anyway.
Yes, you are lost and scrambling in the dark.
We both are. That's how the show works. Or doesn't work. Regardless, we today are reviewing
The Marvelous Adventures
of Gwendolyn Gray.
A young adult.
More like, I'd classify it more as a child's, but regardless.
Early teens.
Okay, early teens.
Fantasy book. Full of despair and misery and all kinds of slight horror elements, which is, of course, totally a child's book.
And the book lends everything exceedingly well.
The book is for me, tonally a mix of A Wrinkle in Time and a little bit of Alice in Wonderland.
Which is great, because we really like both those books. The Wrinkle in Time is basically one of the best child books is ever written, so
yeah, and
mad praise there.
And when I compare them to, I do not mean like to say that
they're knockoffs or anything.
No, it feels like the tone and the feel and the way the book just operates is very similar. They do share some similarities, such as interdimensional travel, but
it's actually a lot heavier leaned into in the Adventures of Gwendolyn Gray, though, than it is in A Wrinkle in Time, so that's really nice.
Yeah. Regardless, the opening for Gwendolyn Gray is awesome. It starts out with your main character, and she's like 11 or 12, and she's a riot, a huge mane of red hair.
Basically the main girl from Brave, Pixar's Brave.
Yeah, that's a good description. Except different personalities. But she lives in this monochrome, depressing cityscape.
Gray steel and stone skyscrapers as far as the eye can see.
And it is barren of color or life or energy.
Or even ideas, right?
Which is a significant theme of the book.
Because Gwendolyn Gray is a creature made up entirely of ideas.
And it causes significant problems for her in the first couple of chapters, because, of course, all of the society around her wants to repress this bursting imagination that she has and direct her towards what they deem more profitable endeavors. And the driving impetus of the book is, as Gwendolyn is going to school one day, one of her imaginations
comes to
imprints
life.
itself on the physical world, and it is, again, a flicker of color within this gray cityscape, and that just gives a glimpse of how gloriously visual the book is.
The book leans so hard and so well into color and just visuals. There's not a single chapter where it is not elegantly color and visuals are not elegantly used.
And it just makes for an incredibly rich reading experience, especially since it's not just color. It's not just whatever. It's the colors are thematically built into the world, and like there's a recurring theme of a green leaf in the
And it's basically, the green leaf is the second bit of color we are introduced to, right? Because obviously the first bit of cover is Gwendolyn's riot of red hair, and this is a visual marker of her rebellion because it's tangled curls that her mother has to spend every morning combing into some slight degree of respectability. But even then, it's not, because it's this it is the only bit of color in the entire city. All the men have charcoal black hair. All the women have slick platinum blonde, right? So, and they're basically carbon copies of one another. And then you have Gwendolyn Gray with tangled red hair, right? And then in comes the leaf, and it's this bright bit of emerald, and it's a recurring feature throughout the book.
and it gains increasing significance as the story continues.
And you slowly get it, because it opens up with, so the opening chapter is Gwendolyn Gray and her mother waiting for the tram to go to school. And Gwendolyn Gray is bored out of her mind, right? And so she starts daydreaming about this emerald forest, and it becomes and her imagination is so vivid that she basically checks out of the real world, right? But then something happens, and she snaps back to the real world, but the single emerald leaf stays, and she sees it fluttering away on the wind. And that is the genesis of the emerald leaf,
And like one of my favorite parts about that scene, because it's not while they're waiting for the train. The imagination starts while they're on their way to the train stop, and so as she loses herself in this imaginary forest, she starts wandering around, and she comes to a river, and that's when she gets pulled out and then the illusion fades, and the river was the train rushing past, and it was just such for me such a cool way to fold in and mesh the imagination into the physical world and make them complementary.
This is possibly one of the best first chapters we've read in a long time, because it sets up the city. The book has basically no exposition that is not excellently well handled.
A lot because like almost all of its exposition is dealt with in a highly stylized fashion.
The exposition is not expositing the history of the world or Gwendolyn's background. No, it's the exposition is setting Gwendolyn Gray apart. It's the city is gray, Gwendolyn is red and vibrant.
It is conveying to you the tone and the feeling of the story.
And what makes Gwendolyn other.
Yes. And progressing it's as that narrative tumbles forward, you get new pieces get fed to you at a perfect pace. You get the Mistermen, which are these faceless.
Okay, so let's get back to the actual where the story really gets kicked off, right? Because Gwendolyn is sitting in school, and all her classmates are at their desk staring into little
glass beads called lambents.
Right, which we'll explain more because they're also really cool, but she does not do this because staring into the lambent...
I don't want to explain too much because that'll, like...
Okay, lambents are really cool, but we're not going to get into them, so sucks to be you. But Gwendolyn doesn't stare into the lambents because it hurts her head. So she looks away, and there she is, kicking her heels as everyone's learning via these lambents. And of course, she gets bored and she starts imagining, right? She actually imagines herself teaching the class, right? And she imagines all of her classmates as woodland creatures. And then one of her classmates is imagined as a bunny. Shock of shocks, this classmate in real life grows bunny ears. And this starts a whole hoo-ha in the school as the girl is rushed off, and Gwendolyn is entirely freaked out about this and runs away from school. She comes the next day, and
no one remembers the classmate.
The girl has been erased by the
And this is where we start getting to like the subtle horror elements.
And we introduce some of my favorite kind of boogeyman creatures.
The Mistermen, they're faceless,
Great names.
bowler hat wearing
Gray
gentlemen
suits
that come in
walking
twos.
that come into it and they walk in perfect synchronization, and they're like, we must find the anomaly, Mr. 4. Yes, Mr. 5. And I believe she went this way. And it is just absolutely fantastic to watch.
Yeah.
And because they're like perfect childhood villains, right?
Yeah.
And so they come to Gwendolyn's school and they're looking for her because they're looking for the source of the anomaly of whoever gave this now disappeared girl rabbit ears. And so Gwendolyn has to bug out. Yeah. And so she starts a minor riot, hops onto the train, and just doesn't get off. And now we're getting a little bit into a blow by blow, which we really don't want to get into.
But this sets off, and then she meets friends, and those friends take her to Otherworld, and it ends up into this multiverse of stories. And all these elements which are touching on, there's more about them. And there's more adventures we're not touching on, and there's more about the various broad strokes that we're touching on.
And it's all tied together beautifully. It's like
such like a neat...
The narrative is so tight.
Not tight as in it's like go, 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 go. No, just tight as in all the
everything
elements
works
tied off and is complementary, and
they all work toward the same goal. And danger is fantastic, and they build to an excellent climax.
Yeah, and
it's like
Gwendolyn's a great opening protagonist that really shines.
Gwendolyn has so much personality. She has this catchphrase that I really like, and it's not necessarily original, but it's she'll say no thank you, or the catchphrase is please and thank, or what is it?
Please and thank you very much.
Right. And so it's frequently used that somebody will offer her something and she'll go, no, thank you, please. Or it comes across terribly precocious and just colorful whenever she says it. And it's great. And Gwendolyn in of herself has mad amounts of character.
Full of spunk and imagination, but also far from perfect. She makes mistakes throughout the book. And it's just... And then her friends are also there, full of personality and character, and they just make for a very fun, colorful cast to follow this incredibly imaginative story through.
So she rapidly meets with her two friends, and all the characters for the book are strong, right? And there's more than one character, or there's more characters than just Gwendolyn the Grey and her friends, but they're all important characters. And her friends are introduced with this little poem that I really like, of Sparrow and Starling, Darrow and Darling. And this is the introduction to her two friends by the names of Sparrow and Starling. And a brother...
They're multiverse lost. They're lost multiverse trekkers.
They're castaways in a world of endless worlds. And they're trying to get back home, but they can't because there's no way to navigate the multiverse.
Yeah, and they drop in just as the Mistermen are about to catch Gwendolyn and immediately
and then
bail
Sparrow,
out.
Who's a little boy about Gwendolyn's age, shoves Gwendolyn off a building to save her life. And it's just... They're swashbuckling adventurers. And then he has his older sister who is
a tech whiz.
And obviously, so obviously cares deeply about Sparrow and is just trying to... keep him alive, because he is an 11-year-old boy always rushing off into adventure and getting into trouble. And at the same time, he does it very charmingly, though he does push the billet just a little bit on several occasions.
Yeah, it's not so much, it's that he doesn't learn. There's elements in the later book where he makes the same mistakes multiple times and does not learn from them. That's the only qualm with his character. The second book, which was the book we were actually
requisitioned to read,
but they offered us both so we could understand the story.
Which I'm on for because I enjoyed both books immensely.
The second book builds upon the first in a really pleasing way. Whereas the first book is an adventure and introducing the story, the second book deals with the well-deserved trauma Gwendolyn incurs from dealing with
Threat and danger, because
at
there's
an
a loads
incredibly
of...
young age, and they're frightening adventures. Like the Mr. Men are actively unsettling characters.
And they're also threatening, right? They're hard to shake. They're like omnipresent villains.
Not omnipresent, but they always catch up somewhere. Even when she jumps into new worlds, they catch up, and it's some of the most delicious. Like, oh snap, they can find her here. It's such a delicious sense of, oh, nowhere's safe.
And it's like, even when she finds allies who are powerful and daring adventurers, these people are no one can actually harm the Mr. Men, right? Even some of somewhere at some point in the book one, they meet a pirate who gets into a sword fight with a Mr. Men, and the Mr. Men are basically untouchable. They fight him off with canes, and it's like, this pirate is one of the best swordsmen of his world, and he can't lay a finger on the Mr. Men. And so then the Mr. Men carry over into book two, and as we really we delve into Gwendolyn's trauma, and
that is handled so well throughout the course of the book in a myriad of different ways. It crops up at inconvenient times. It changes as the situation, the way it affects the story changes,
and then the story, and then Gwendolyn goes to the land of the fairies, and the fact that she goes into the lands of the fairies while suffering trauma actually interacts with the world to the extent that her trauma shifts and changes, and she starts dealing with a secondary, potentially even more serious problem. So she'll go from incredibly depressed and listless to this hyper-energetic, mischievous Fae character. And you have this wonderful dichotomy of color, of overly vibrant color where she can lose herself in the mischief around her, to this black pit where she can only curl up in the ball and hope. Or it's like, she doesn't even have hope, she's just that deep into the trauma.
Mm-hmm. And the more characters introduced in the Fae realm is wildly different from any of the world, from either her home world or the world she visited in the first book, which just is very enjoyable because, again,
but also necessary for keeping the story readable, per se.
New characters are added, and
all which are great. Again, she meets another character who is potentially my favorite character from the series.
Yeah.
I can't explain it too much because
it's kind of spoilerish and kind of spoilerish from the first book.
The author does a fantastic job of tailoring dialogue to the character, so each character talks in a very different way, and it's just lovely to experience.
Yeah. I did have one sort of potential qualm about the second book, and that it got much more overtly political. And with the mixed bag, some of the elements worked really well, like the whole Puck being transgender and flipping back and forth at will was a very interesting.
I didn't know if that was political or just actual fairy lore.
I don't know if it was fairly little,
because that feels very Fae-esque.
But that's part of why it was so smooth, and it's part of that with various other elements. Like there was touches on it with Syria and with later on with the pirate woman. So there were just a couple very overtly political elements, and some of them were handled well, and some of them, and by well I mean like the Puck being transgender was really interesting.
Puck wasn't transgender. He actively swapped genders from day to day. So sometimes he was a girl and his name changed, and sometimes he was a boy and his name changed accordingly.
Yeah, and them being Fae made it much more elegant, made it a very elegant transition, especially since the way everybody interacted with it. It made interactions with Puck, it's the second name that changes, very interesting because bargains and names are very important in the Fae realm. So a character that's constantly changing their name and the way they orient themselves in a bargain made for very interesting discussions. and just all the ways that the Fey realm were implemented and all the different rules. You got really deep into the way the Fey operated within the world / universe, and it was really cool. Some of the other political elements weren't as neatly handled because they were more blunt, just whoosh, this is what, and then moved on. They were tended to be brief, but it was still just a mixed bag and just a very loud, at times, political statements.
Really not too bad, though.
Not terrible, but noticeable. And some people, it didn't bother me, but it's something that will bother some people. I don't think I have a whole lot.
Like, we can't necessarily get too much into the second book without exploring mad spoilers and causing a storm of just unfortunateness.
Yeah, but also almost everything we really liked about this first book was present and generally improved upon in the second. Like, more characters were added. And
Gwendolyn's goals change. Gwendolyn resolved the first book with... Okay, so the first book, Gwendolyn did something in the climax, and we're not even talking about her trauma. This caused a backlash that she now has to deal with in book 2, right? Not least of which is that her 2 friends, which you are deeply attached to, have gone missing, and so she is all afire to go find them. Which is really great, because the narrative of the story actively inhibits her from going out and doing what she wants to do, which is just great storytelling. Because she is every move she makes is either forcefully pulling her away or her forcefully pushing herself toward finding her friends. And it works great because she's the main character and she's actively moving the story along or being fought by the story.
Yeah, and we mentioned it a little bit before, but I don't think with as much emphasis as I really want to. Both book 1 and book 2 are full of incredibly creative and neat ideas, just bursting with them, small and large alike. Every step, every chapter in the world, you are just inhabiting this incredible imagination from the author and just the way it's all built.
And it's concentrated, right? So there are no slow chapters or chapters that you have long spaces in between the bits of bright interest. No, it's just all just concentrated interest, and the chapters are never long or too short.
And you have a good mix of action chapters versus rest chapters, etc., etc.
And drama chapters, and like none of the drama. The books are loaded with strong drama, right? Like Gwendolyn's trauma, or it's conflict where she wants to do something but she has to go do something else, or where she makes a mistake and instead of again, particularly in the second book, she makes a mistake, and then as she gets out of it, she recognizes this mistake and tries to rectify it of her own accord, which is hugely valuable instead of her being found and just chewed out. And it's just, again, really well made books, really well written and structured and everything. But also tonally, right? The tones of the book work really well. They kind of feel very whimsical. The tone definitely, for me, leans toward Wheel of Time more than Alice.
A Wrinkle in Time.
No, Wrinkle in Time, there we go. And the tone is one of the things I really enjoyed about the book.
Yeah.
But
anything else?
No, I'm afraid not.
Toodaloos, you terrible, terrible people.
Fare thee wells, our future friends. From us who we never introduced ourselves.
Yeah, it don't matter.
They don't need to know that.
It's somewhere on the wide interwebs. I have faith in them.
I don't. I have faith in no one.
That's besides the point.
If I was not here, everyone would be driving their cars off cliffs. I am sure of it.
I mean, you're not in UK and everybody's driving on the wrong side of the road, so your argument holds water as far as I'm concerned.
Yes. Fare thee well, our future friends.
Bye.